There is a chair in room 4 South 7 that does not match anything else in the building. Everything else at Mercer Crossland Medical Center is the color of nothing. The walls are the gray they paint walls when they want you to forget you are in them. The floors shine because a man named Cleophas buffs them at 3 in the morning, humming low under his breath the way his own mother is still used to hum over a sink. Old church songs with the words worn off them. The machines breathe and beep in the language machines used to say, a person is still here, but the chair is wood. Old oak gone dark at the armrest where 40 years of hands have rested. Somebody dragged it up from a waiting room that no longer exists, back when this wing was something else, and it stayed because nobody ever decided to throw it out. For 8 months, a woman sat in that chair on her breaks, 20 minutes at a time, in the part of the night when the hospital goes quiet and honest. She sat with a man who could not move, could not speak, could not open his eyes. She did not know his name. She did not know that 3 buildings away, in an office tower with his initials etched into the glass, 200 people were waiting to find out if he would ever wake up. She only knew that he was alone, and that her mother had taught her what you do about that. This is what she did about it. Imani Foster's alarm went off at 4:45 in the morning, and she silenced it before the second buzz so it would not wake the boy. She lay still for a moment in the dark, the satin bonnet still tied over her hair from the night before, the way she always did, counting the things that had to happen before she could leave the apartment. Marcus's backpack, the note for Miss Delphine across the hall, who watched him until the school bus came. The $40 she owed Delphine for the week, folded already in an envelope on the counter. Her own scrubs, washed last night, hung over the bathroom door so the wrinkles would fall out. She got up. She did not turn on the overhead light. She moved through the small apartment by memory, by the gray coming in around the blinds, past the photo of her mother taped to the side of the refrigerator, and she packed her son's lunch the way she did every day. Peanut butter on the heel of the loaf for her, the good slices for him, an apple cut into sections because he would not eat it whole. A note on a torn piece of paper that said the same thing it said most mornings, in slightly different words. Today it said, "Be the kind one. Love, Mama." There was still half a pan of cornbread on the stove from the greens she had made 2 nights back, when she had the strength to cook, and she cut a square of it for the bus and wrapped it in a paper towel. Marcus was 7. He slept the way only children sleep, with his whole body, one arm hanging off the mattress like it had given up halfway through a thought. His hair was getting long. She would need to take him by Pop's on Saturday for a lineup before church, and Pop would charge her half and pretend he hadn't, the way he'd been doing since Marcus was a baby. Imani stood in his doorway for the length of one breath, then she went to work. She made $32.40 an hour as a registered nurse on the night float, which sounded like a great deal of money to people who had never tried to raise a child on it in a city that got more expensive every spring. She had done the math so many times it ran in the background of her mind like a second heartbeat. Rent, daycare she could not always afford and so traded for with Delphine, the student loan from the 2 years of nursing school she had finished, and the quieter loan, the one with no interest and no statements, of the master's degree she had not finished. She had been 3 semesters from becoming a nurse practitioner when she found out about Marcus. Andre had stayed for the pregnancy and most of the first year, and then one morning his side of the closet was empty and his key was on the table, and that was the entire conversation they ever had about it. Her mother used to say a thing about that too. Her mother had a thing she said about almost everything. The bus came at 5:31. Imani could have driven, but the car needed a timing belt she was saving for, and gas was gas. And the bus was $1.75 each way and gave her 31 minutes to close her eyes without anyone needing anything from her. It carried her out of the southwest side, past the corner store with its security gate still down, past the wide brick church where she had been baptized, and where her mother's funeral had overflowed 3 summers back. She rode with her forehead against the cold window and watched Atlanta come up gray and then gold as the sun found the tops of the towers downtown. One of those towers had a name on it she would learn later. For now it was just a building, lit from inside, full of people she would never meet. She clocked in at 6 for the tail end of the night shift, which was the shift nobody wanted and therefore the shift she could always get. The intensive care unit at Mercer Crossland had 16 beds and, on a good night, 4 nurses to cover them. On the night Imani's story really begins, there were 3. The charge nurse, a heavyset woman named Renata who had worked the unit for 19 years and had a laugh like a door slamming, gave report from behind a wall of coffee. Bed 2 was improving, Bed 9 was not. Bed 11's family had finally agreed to comfort care, and everyone should be gentle when they came in. And then Renata's pen moved down the board and stopped on 4 South 7, and she said the thing she said about that room every single shift in the same flat voice, like a fact about the weather. 7 still 7, Renata said. No change, no visitors, vitals are vitals. Who is he? Imani asked. It was her first week floating to this unit. She had not yet learned the room or the rules around it. Renata looked at her over the coffee. He's a man in a bed, she said. That's all the chart wants you to know. What the chart wanted Imani to know was thin, male, late 40s. Admitted 8 days prior following a motor vehicle collision on the interstate, severe traumatic brain injury, a long surgery the first night that had saved his life and taken something else. The chart called him by a name that did not sound like a name, a placeholder strung together from an insurance code, and an initial, the kind of name a hospital gives a man when his real one has been locked somewhere above Imani's clearance. There was a note in the file, flagged in red, Privacy hold. Direct all inquiries to administration, no press, no public confirmation. Imani had seen privacy holds before. They were for the famous and the threatened, and the people whose families had lawyers fast. She did not think about it much. A privacy hold did not change the work. The work was the same for everyone. Turn him every 2 hours, so his skin would not break down, check the lines, suction when he needed it, watch the numbers, write what she saw. The work did not care who you were underneath. That was the one mercy of the work. She did her assessment. She talked to him while she did it, the way she talked to all of them, because her mother had told her a long time ago that a body in a bed is still a person in a room, and a person in a room should not be handled in silence like furniture being moved. So she told him her name. She told him it was Tuesday. She told him the weather, which was the only small talk she had at 6 in the morning, and she told him she was going to lift his arm now and it might feel cold. His eyes did not open, his face did not change. But she measured him anyway, the way they taught her, on the scale that turns a person's whole presence in the world into a number you can write down. Eyes no opening, even to pain. Verbal, no sound motor, a flexion, a curl of the fingers, that might have been a reflex, and might have been more. She added it up the way she always did. The number was low. The number had been low for 8 days. The scale has a name, doctors say with their whole chest, and nurses say 100 times a shift until it stops sounding like words, and the number it gave her that morning told her, in the cold grammar of the thing, that the man in 4 South 7 was very far away. She finished her assessment. She wrote what she saw. And then, because there was a minute before bed 9's alarm would need her, she looked at him a second longer than the chart required. He had a good face. That was a strange thing to think, and she thought it anyway. Not handsome, exactly, lived in. The face of a man who had spent his life concentrating on something. There were laugh lines at his eyes that did not match the stillness of the rest of him. Lines you only get from a face that used to move a great deal, and a small scar through one eyebrow, old, white, from some childhood Imani would never hear about. Somebody had loved this face once. Somebody, somewhere, was probably loving it right now and not allowed to say so out loud. All right, she told him. I'll see you tonight. She did not know yet that she would. She did not know yet that she would see him almost every night for the better part of a year. She finished her shift, rode the bus home in the full light of morning, slept 4 hours, picked her son up from the bus, helped him with letters he already knew, made dinner from what was in the cabinet, and went back. That was the shape of her days. That had been the shape of her days for 6 years. It is worth saying, because she would never say it about herself, what kind of nurse Imani Foster was. The charts would not say it. The hospital's records would not say it. But the patients knew, in the way patients always know, which nurse will come when you press the button and which nurse hopes you will fall back asleep. Imani came. She came at the end of a double when her feet had stopped being feet and become 2 separate problems she was negotiating with. She came to the ones who were rude and the ones who were frightened, which were usually the same ones. She had a thing she did with her hand on a shoulder, a particular pressure, that her patients could not have described but missed when other nurses touched them. She had learned it from her mother, who had not been a nurse at all. Her mother had been a woman who sat with people. That was the whole of it. Constance Foster had come up from a little town in South Georgia, where her own people had worked land that was never theirs, and she carried the South in her the way some people carry it in the food and the church, and a certain stubborn upright way of moving through a hard day. She worked 30 years as a home health aide on the south side of the city, going into the apartments of the old and the dying and the forgotten, and the thing she was paid to do was bathe them and feed them and turn them. But the thing she actually did, the thing people remembered at her funeral in a church that could not hold everyone who came, was sit with them. She sat with people the system had stopped sitting with. She sat in the bad hours. She held hands that no one else would hold, and she was more than once the last face a person saw in this life, and she considered this not a burden but the entire point. Sit with people. Constance used to tell her daughter, in the kitchen, over the ironing on the bus, most folks, you strip it all away, all they want is somebody to sit with them. Sitting is the first kind of love. It's the one comes before all the others. You learn to sit with somebody, baby, and you won't never run out of ways to help. Constance had died 3 years ago, fast the way she would have wanted, in a hospital bed with her daughter in the chair beside her. The funeral filled the brick church on the southwest side and then filled the sidewalk outside it, the choir carrying her out on a hymn that everybody knew without a program. And afterward the women of the church laid the long tables in the based, and the room smelled of collard greens and fried chicken and 3 different sweet potato pies, and people Imani had never met told her for hours what her mother had been to them. Imani had not left her mother's bedside chair for 2 days at the end. When the end came, she was sitting. She liked to think her mother had known that. So when Imani Foster looked at the man in 4 South 7, with his good face and his red-flagged file and his name that was not a name, and saw that in 8 days not one person had come to sit beside him, something in her that was older than the job took note. But that would come later. First, there is the other half of the story. The half that was happening at the same time, 3 buildings away, behind glass with his initials on it. Because the man in the bed had a name after all, and the name had built something. His name was Garrett Cole, and he had come from nothing, which is to say he had come from a 2-bedroom house in southwest Atlanta, where his mother raised 4 poor children on what she made cleaning offices downtown after everyone else had gone home. Her own people had come up from Alabama a generation before, chasing work that was always supposed to be better in the city, and she sang the songs they brought with them while she worked, low gospel hymns in a kitchen that smelled, on a good Sunday, of sweet potato pie. Garrett used to ride with her some nights, when he was small and there was no one to leave him with, and he would do his homework on the carpet of executives who would never know a child had slept under their desks. He remembered the buildings. He remembered how clean they got and how no one ever saw who cleaned them. His mother would say, wiping down a counter that already shone, that there were 2 kinds of people in the world. The ones who got watched and the ones who did the watching. She did not say it bitterly. She said it the way you state a law of physics. She wanted her son to be the kind who got watched. She did not live to see how completely he became it. She died of a thing that should not have killed her, a thing that a machine, watching, would have caught. A pressure that climbed slowly for months while she told no one because telling someone cost money she did not have. By the time anyone was watching, it was too late to do anything but be sorry. Garrett was 26. He had a degree in computer science and a job he did not love, and, after the funeral in a church much like the one that would one day overflow for Constance Foster, a single furious idea that would not leave him alone, that nobody should die for lack of being watched. He built the first version of it in an apartment with 3 other people and a coffee machine that was the most valuable thing they owned. It was software at first, then software and small sensors, then a system, then a platform, then a company with a name. He called it Marrow Health, and when people asked why, he said it was because the marrow is the part of you that makes the things that keep you alive, the part nobody sees, working in the dark inside the bone. He did not tell them the other reason. The other reason came later and was much worse. Marrow Health watched people. That was the whole pitch, refined over 15 years into a single clean sentence Garrett could say in a boardroom or a hospital basement. We make sure no one slips through unwatched. Hospitals bought it. Then bigger hospitals. Then hospital systems that ran whole states. The sensors got smaller and the software got smarter, and somewhere in there Garrett Cole stopped being a man with an idea and became a man with a fortune, the kind of fortune that has its own staff, its own lawyers, its own gravity. He was on the cover of magazines that put founders on covers. He gave a talk once that had been watched 4 million times, in which he said the line everyone quoted back to him forever after, the line that became the company's unofficial creed and his own private religion. If you can monitor it, you can save it. The rest is just sitting around. He believed it. He needed to believe it. Because there was a thing he could not monitor and had not saved, and the not saving of it had hollowed out a place inside him that no amount of building ever filled: his son. Garrett did not talk about his son. The people closest to him knew the shape of the absence without ever being shown the inside of it. There had been a boy. The boy had been 8. The thing that took him was in his blood, in the marrow, in the exact place Garrett would later name his company after, and it was a thing that all the watching in the world could not have stopped because it was already there, written into the boy before he was born, waiting. Garrett had monitored everything. He had the best people. He had machines that beeped through the night in a room, very much like the one he would one day occupy. He watched his son's numbers climb and fall for 14 months, and the numbers told him everything except how to make it not be true. And at the end the boy was very far away, and then he was gone. And Garrett Cole, who had built his entire life on the promise that watching could save you, had watched his son die. His marriage did not survive it. Few do. His wife had wanted in the last weeks to stop the machines and simply hold the boy, to put down the charts and climb into the bed and be his mother and not his monitor. She used to sing to the boy the same hymns Garrett's own mother had hummed over the dishes, the ones that came up from Alabama, and in the last weeks she sang them again. Garrett could not. Stopping the watching felt like giving up, and giving up felt like murder. And so he stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed reading numbers, while his wife lay curled around their son, singing the songs she had sung him as a baby. She left within the year. She told him, on her way out, the cruelest true thing anyone ever said to him. She said, "You loved him so much you forgot to be with him." He took the company public 18 months later. He worked. Work was the only thing that did not ask him to sit still. He built Marrow Health into something that watched over 100,000 beds across the country. And every one of those beds had a screen that could tell you a patient's heart rate and oxygen and pressure and a dozen other numbers, and not one of them could tell you whether the patient in it was alone. That was not a thing Garrett's company measured. It had not occurred to anyone that it could be measured. It had not occurred to Garrett that it mattered. He was 47 the spring it all stopped. He had just closed a funding round large enough to make the news, $400 million to expand the platform overseas, and he was tired in a way that money does not fix, and had told his oldest friend and chief financial officer, a steady man named Theodore Banks, that he was going to take a few weeks. Go somewhere fun with Signofo. Sit on a beach and do the one thing he was worst at, which was nothing. Theodore had laughed and said he would believe it when he saw it. Garrett never made it to the beach. He was driving north on the interstate on a wet Thursday evening, alone, when a truck 3 cars ahead lost a tire at 70 miles an hour. The cascade took 4 seconds. Garrett's car went into the divider and his head went into a future no one could have monitored their way out of. The first responders did not know who he was. He carried almost nothing. He had been on his way to do nothing and had packed accordingly. By the time anyone matched the unconscious man at Mercer Crossland Medical Center to the face on the magazine covers, the lawyers had already arrived, and the lawyers did what lawyers do, which was build a wall, a privacy hold, no press, no public confirmation. A founder worth a great deal of money does not get to lie unconscious in a public hospital with his name on the door, because there are partners and stock prices and 100,000 beds, depending on the idea that the man who watched everything is not himself unwatchable. So they took his name off the room. They gave him a string of letters and a number, and they put him in 4 South 7, in a bed under a screen made by his own company, and the screen watched him with perfect attention and could not tell anyone the one thing that was wrong, which was that he was alone and that no one was coming. 3 buildings away, the lights stayed on all night in a tower with his initials etched into the glass. 200 people he employed worried about him in the careful, terrified language of people whose livelihoods depend on a man's pulse. Theodore Banks slept in his office and made phone calls and held the company together with his bare hands and visited the room exactly once, early, before the hold went up, and could not bear to go back, because Garrett had been the kind of friend you talk to. And you cannot talk to a man who is not there. And 6 floors below all of that worry, on the night float, a nurse who had never heard the name Garrett Cole and would not have recognized his face from a magazine she would never buy, walked into 4 South 7 to start her assessment, and saw a man alone in a room, and remembered her mother. The thing about an intensive care unit at night is that it has rhythms, and you learn them, and inside the rhythms there are gaps. 2 patients to a nurse on the fight float, sometimes 3 when they were short, which they always were. The work came in waves. There were stretches of crisis where Imani moved through 3 rooms at once, with her hands and her mind in different beds, and then there were the dead hours, the 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, when the unit settled and the families went home to sleep, and the only sounds were the machines and the ice maker down the hall, and Cleophas's buffer going back and forth, polishing a floor no one would see. In those gaps, the hospital gave you 20 minutes. A break. A chance to sit in the windowless lounge with a vending machine and a microwave that smelled of everyone's dinner, and put your feet up and look at your phone and try to remember you were a person. Imani took her breaks like everyone else the first few weeks. She ate her peanut butter heel, or the square of cold cornbread, and looked at pictures of Marcus and counted the hours until she could lie down. And then one night in her second week, a Thursday dead hour quiet, she walked past 4 South 7 on her way to the lounge and stopped. The door was open the way they kept the doors open, so the nurses could see in. The screen glowed over the bed with its calm green numbers, his own company's numbers, though she did not know it. Watching him say nothing was changing. He lay exactly as he had lain every night, turned to his left because it was an even hour, his good face slack and far away, and next to the bed, in the corner where they had pushed it to make room for the equipment, was the chair. The old oak chair that did not match anything, empty, Imani stood in the doorway. She thought about the lounge and the vending machine and her aching feet. She thought about her phone and her son's face on it. And she thought, the way you think a thought you did not decide to think, of her mother in a kitchen a long time ago, saying the thing she said about everything. Sit with people, it's the one before all the others. She had 20 minutes. She went in. She did not turn on the light. She crossed to the corner and she pulled the old chair close to the bed. The wood scraping soft on the floor Cleophas had polished, and she sat down in it, and for a moment she did not know what she was doing there or what she had thought she would do. He could not hear her. Every number on the screen said he could not hear her. The scale she ran in her head said he was very far away, farther than her voice could reach. She sat anyway. That was the point. That had always been the point. You did not sit with someone because it would fix them. You sat with someone because they should not be alone, and whether they knew you were there was not the question that mattered. Her mother had sat with people who would never know. Her mother had counted it the same. "Hey," Imani said finally into the quiet. "It's me again, it's Tuesday. No, it's Thursday, I lose track in here." The screen watched, the man did not move. "I'm Imani," she said. "I don't know what they call you. The chart's got some mess of letters. I'm not going to call you that. So I'm just going to talk, if that's all right, and you don't have to say anything back." She looked at his hand on the blanket, the one curled in the flexion that might have been reflex and might have been more. After a moment, the way her mother had taught her, the way she did with all of them, she put her own hand over it. Not gripping, just resting, just there. "My mama used to say sitting is the first kind of love," she told him. "I never knew if I believed that. But here I am." She stayed 19 minutes. She talked about nothing. About the weather, and her son in a show she was too tired to finish watching, and the man named Garrett Cole who had spent his whole life and his whole fortune building machines to watch over people exactly like the man he had become, lay in the dark and was for the first time in 8 days, not alone. He did not wake. Nothing on the screen changed. There was no sign, no flutter, no squeeze of the hand, nothing a chart would record or a doctor would believe. But 3 buildings away, the lights burned in his tower, and not one of those 200 people knew that the most important thing that had happened to Garrett Cole in 8 days had just happened in the dark, in a corner, in an old oak chair, and that the woman who did it did not even know his name. She came back the next night. She had not planned to. She told herself, riding in on the bus with her forehead on the cold glass, that she would not make a thing of it, that one night had been one night. But the dead hour came around again. 2:40 in the morning, the unit settled and the family's gone, and her feet carried her past the lounge and down the hall and into 4 South 7 before she had finished arguing with herself about it. So she sat, and the night after that she sat, and by the end of the week it was no longer a decision she made but a thing she did. The way she packed Marcus's lunch the same way every morning without thinking, because some kinds of care become the bones of a day and you stop noticing you are doing them. She learned the room. She learned that the screen over his bed was made by a company she had never heard of. A small clean logo in the corner she glanced at 1,000 times without reading, and that it watched him with a thoroughness the older monitors in the other rooms could not match. It tracked things she had to chart by hand elsewhere. It was, she thought once, almost like having a second nurse in the room, one that never slept and never looked away and never in 8 months told her a single thing that mattered. She did not know she was looking at the man's life's work. She did not know that the green numbers keeping their patient vigil over Garrett Cole had been dreamed up by Garrett Cole in an apartment with a broken coffee machine to make sure no one slipped through unwatched. She only knew the machine watched, and that watching was not the same as company, and that the difference was the whole reason she kept coming back. It was in the 3rd week that she found the writing. She had reached down to adjust the chair, to drag it an inch closer to the bed, and her fingers found something carved into the underside of the seat where the oak was worn smooth. She tipped the chair and looked. Ladders, cut shallow with something small, an old pocket knife maybe, the way people used to mark the things that belonged to them. 2 initials and 3 words. M.H. Sit a while. She ran her thumb over it in the dark. She did not know whose initials those were. She would ask Renata later, and Renata would go quiet for a moment in a way Renata almost never did, and say that there had been a nurse on this unit a long time ago, before Renata's time even, a woman everyone just called Miss Hattie, who had a way with the ones nobody came for. Miss Hattie had kept a chair by the beds of the patients who had no people. She had carved her initials in the bottom of it so that nobody would haul it off to a storage room. Miss Hattie was gone now, years gone, but the chair had outlasted her, and it had outlasted the waiting room it came from, and it had ended up in 4 South 7 by the kind of accident that does not feel entirely like an accident when you are sitting in it at 3 in the morning with your hand over a stranger's. Sit a while. Imani had laughed very quietly, in the dark the night she found it. Of course the chair already knew. She set it down gently, the way you set down something that turns out to be older and stranger than you thought, and she sat in it, and she did what it said. What she said to him changed over the weeks. At first it had been weather and small talk, the stuff you say to fill a silence. But you cannot fill a silence with nothing for very long, night after night. And so without quite meaning to, she began to tell him true things. She told him about Marcus, about the gap-toothed grin and the way he sounded out words too big for him, and the night terrors he had gotten after Andre left, which had finally, mercifully, stopped. She told him about her mother, about the funeral that overflowed the church and the long basement tables after, about the thing her mother said about sitting. She told him about the master's degree 3 semesters from done, the one she did not let herself think about, because thinking about it cost more than she could pay. She told this unconscious stranger things she had not told another living soul, because he was the safest listener in the world, a man who could not judge her or pity her, or repeat a word of it. And there is a particular kind of honesty that only comes out in the presence of someone who cannot answer back. And one night, because the silence asked for more than her own life could fill, she started reading to him. She had a paperback in her bag, swollen and soft from being carried, a novel her mother had loved and pressed on her years ago, and that she had never finished. Their eyes were watching God. She started it over from the beginning, reading aloud in the dark hour, her voice low so it would not carry to the nurse's station, reading a chapter or two a night across the weeks, and when she finished it she started another book, and then another. Some nights when the reading ran out before the 20 minutes did, she hummed instead, low, one of the hymns her mother used to carry around the apartment, the ones with the words worn off. She read and hummed the way you read to a child who has fallen asleep, not stopping at the sleep, because the reading was never really about being heard. It was about not leaving him in silence. It was about the human voice in a room, which is a thing all the monitors in the world cannot supply. She did not know that she was doing something with a name. She would learn it later, much later, from a doctor who came down to the unit to find out what in the world had been going on in 4 South 7, and who would use a term Imani had heard exactly once, years before, half asleep at the back of a fellowship lecture she had sat in on, hoping to finish the degree she never finished. Familiar auditory sensory training. The research was real and not large and not loud, that a patient in the deep gray country between coma and waking, in the minimally conscious state where the scale gives you a low number and no promises, may surface faster when a familiar voice speaks to him, reads to him, says his name and tells him stories day after day than when he is left to the machines. The brain, the theory went, reaches toward the voices it loves the way a plant reaches toward a light it cannot name. The studies were careful. They did not promise miracles. They suggested only that being spoken to mattered, that company was not nothing, that a voice in the dark might be doing quiet work no monitor could measure. Imani had not read the studies. She did not have the training. She had a dead mother and a paperback and 20 minutes, and she was, without the slightest idea that she was doing it, running a protocol that careful people in white coats had spent careers trying to prove, and running it not because docent said to, but because her mother had said to, which turned out to be the same instruction arriving by a different road. Sit with people. The science in the kitchen agreed. They had always agreed. The science had just taken longer to say it. The weeks became months. Winter came to Atlanta, such as it comes, gray rain and one freak morning of snow that's closed the schools and stranded Marcus home with Delphine, who fed him pie and let him watch cartoons all day. The man in 4 South 7 did not wake, but Imani, who turned him and charted him and read to him and ran the scale on him night after night, began to notice things the day shift did not, because the day shift did not sit. His number, the low one, the one that had not moved in weeks, moved, not much, a point, a flicker. There were mornings she ran the scale and his fingers found her hand before she touched them, a curl that came toward her instead of away, and she wrote it down in the careful neutral language of the chart and did not let herself hope, because hope was a thing she had learned to ration like everything else. But she noticed. She was the only one who noticed, because noticing requires being there, and she was the only one who was there. 8 floors of worry sat above her, and 3 buildings away the tower burned all night, and not one of the people in it knew her name. That was the strangeness of it, the thing that would astonish everyone later, when it all came out. That for the better part of a year, the woman who was doing the one thing for Garrett Cole that no one in his vast and frightened empire knew how to do, was a person none of them had ever heard of, working a shift none of them respected, for a wage several of them spent on a single dinner. Theodore Banks ran the company on no sleep and visited the room once, in the first week before the wall went up, and stood at the foot of the bed exactly as Garrett had once stood at the foot of another bed. Arms crossed, reading numbers, unable to do the thing the room actually required. He left after 4 minutes. He could not bear it. He told himself he would come back when there was something to say, and there was never anything to say, so he never came back. He sent flowers the room was not allowed to display. He approved an invoice, without ever once understanding what he was reading, for a private monitoring upgrade his own company supplied at cost to a hospital that had, by sheer accident, admitted its founder. The screen over Garrett's bed was the best his money could buy. It watched him perfectly. It told Theodore Banks, in clean reports delivered to his office every morning, every single thing about Garrett Cole except the one thing that was true, which was that a stranger had begun to love him in the dark. Imani walked past the elevators 100 times that hadn't carried a single visitor up to 4 South 7. She did not know that the locked file in administration held a name that was on the side of a building she could see from the bus. She did not know that her charge nurse knew, and her unit director knew, and that they had been told, in the careful language of privacy holds, to say nothing, and to let the night float handle a man in a bed like any other, and that they had watched her go into that room every night for months and had decided, without ever discussing it, not to tell her, because telling her might change what she was doing, and what she was doing was the only good thing happening in that room. 3 floors of the building knew his name and could not say it. One nurse did not know it and did not need it. They were that close they passed in the hall. They rode the same elevators on different errands. And the chair sat between 2 worlds that were touching without knowing they touched. The old oak chair with Miss Hattie's 3 words carved underneath, the weight night after night, of a woman who had come to sit a while with a man whose face she knew better than her own by now, and whose name she had never once been told. She did not need the name. That was the thing her mother had understood, the thing the whole machine of his company had been built to avoid understanding. You do not need to know who a person is to sit with them. You only need to know that they are a person, and that they are alone, and that you have 20 minutes, and an old chair, and a mother's voice in your ear telling you what the 20 minutes are for. So she sat, and the man who had built his life on watching lay under the best watching money could buy, and was watched, and was monitored, and was alone except for her, and somewhere far down in the gray country where the scale could not follow him, something began very slowly to reach toward the sounds of a voice it did not yet have a name for. The night it began to turn was an ordinary night, which is how those nights usually are. It was late February, the dead hour, 2:50 in the morning. Imani had finished her rounds and turned the man in 4 South 7 to his right side because it was an odd hour, and she had pulled the old chair close and sat down in it with the paperback she did not really need anymore, because she had stopped reading from it as much as she talked. She was tired in the deep way, the way that has nothing to do with sleep, the kind of tired you carry for years. Marcus had been up the night before with a fever that turned out to be nothing, and she had worked anyway, because there was no version of her life in which she did not work, and the tiredness had pooled somewhere behind her eyes and would not drain. So that night she did not talk about the weather. She put her hand over his, the curled one, and she told him the thing she had never told anyone. "I'm scared I'm like him," she said into the dark. "Andre, my boy's daddy. I'm scared that somewhere in me there's the same thing that let him pack a bag one morning and decide a whole person was too heavy to carry. Because some nights, when Marcus sleep and the rent's late and my feet are gone, I feel it. This little voice that says you could put it all down, you could just go. And I hate that voice. I hate that I have it. My mama never had it. My mama carried everybody and never once looked at the door." The machine watched. The numbers held their steady green. "I never told her that," Imani said. "She died and I never told her I was scared I had the running in me. And now I tell it to a man who can't hear me in the middle of the night because that's the only kind of safe I can find." She stopped. She was not crying. She had stopped being a person who cried easily a long time ago. She just sat with the thing she had said, let it be in the room with her the way she let everything be in the room. And then the hand under her hand moved, not the flexion, not the reflex curl away that the scale had been measuring for months. The fingers came up and closed, slow and deliberate and weak. Around 2 of hers they held on, and from the bed came a sound, the first sound the man had made in the entire time she had known him, a low, rough exhale that was not quite a word but was trying to be, the sound of a voice that had forgotten the shape of itself reaching for it anyway. Imani did not move. She did not call out. She had been a nurse long enough to know that some moments you do not interrupt with the cavalry, that there are things that happen in the gray country that a room full of bright lights and shouting people will scare back under. She just held on. She held the hand that was holding hers, and she leaned close and she said the only thing there was to say, which was the thing her mother had said to every frightened soul she ever sat with. "I'm here," she said. "You're not by yourself. I'm right here." The fingers tightened. The exhale came again. And somewhere far down in the dark where he had been, In the place the scale could not follow, and the monitors could not measure, the man who had built his whole life on watching reached toward a voice he could not name, and began at last the long climb back toward the light. The waking was not a movie, it is never a movie. It took 11 more days. He surfaced, and sank and surfaced again, the number on the scale climbing one hard point at a time, eyes opening to nothing and then to slits and then, one gray morning, to a ceiling he did not recognize. He could not speak for a week after that. When the words came, they came broken, out of order, a man reassembling a language from spare parts. He did not know where he was. He did not know how long. He knew almost nothing in those first days, except one thing he could not have explained to anyone, which was that there had been a voice. A woman's voice, low in the dark, reading to him, humming old hymns he half remembered from a kitchen long ago, telling him about a boy named Marcus and a mother who sat with people, telling him he was not by himself. He did not know if the voice was real or something his drowning brain had built to keep itself company. He only knew he had reached for it, and it had not gone away, and that was the rope he had climbed. The hospital, of course, came alive. A man does not emerge from 8 months in the gray country quietly. There were doctors who had not visited the room in months, suddenly very interested in the room. There was a neurologist, a precise woman named Dr. Okafor, who pulled the chart and read 8 months of night float notes in a single sitting, and then came down to the unit herself, off hours, to find the nurse who had written them. She found Imani at the station at the end of a shift, gray with exhaustion, charting. "You're Foster," Dr. Okafor said. It was not a question. "Night float. You've been charting 4 South 7. "Most nights," Imani said. "Is he?" "He's awake," the doctor said. "He's talking. It's early, but he's going to come back." She set the chart down on the counter between them. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to understand I'm asking as a doctor, not because you're in any trouble. These notes. 8 months. You charted that you spent your breaks in his room, that you spoke to him, that you read to him." She paused. "There's a body of research on this. It's not large and it's not certain, and most people in this building have never heard of it. Familiar auditory stimulation. The theory is that a consistent human voice, day after day, can help pull a patient up out of where he was. We don't say it cures anyone. We're careful not to promise. But the patients who come back faster are very often the ones who had somebody." Imani looked at her. "I didn't know the name of any of that," she said. "I didn't do it because of a study." "I know," said Dr. Okafor. "That's what I find remarkable. You did it because why did you do it?" Imani thought about her mother in a kitchen a long time ago. "Because he was by himself," she said. "And my mama taught me you don't leave people by themselves. That's all. There's no science in it. It's just what you do." The doctor was quiet for a moment. "Well," she said finally, "it turns out the science and your mother agree." She picked up the chart. "He's been asking about a voice. He thinks he dreamed it. I haven't told him anything." She looked at Imani steadily. "When he's ready, I think someone should tell him it wasn't a dream. It was Theodore Banks who put it all together in the end, and Theodore Banks who said the words out loud. He came the day Garrett could sit up. He had been told his friend was awake, and he had crossed the 3 buildings between the tower and the hospital on foot, in the rain, without an umbrella, because he could not stand to wait for a car. He came up to the unit he had visited exactly once in 8 months and could not bear to enter again, and he asked at the station for Garrett Cole, using the real name for the first time in the open, because the wall could come down now. The man was awake. There was nothing left to protect. The charge nurse, Renata, went very still. Then she said, "He's got a nurse in with him." Night float stayed past her shift. "I'll take you." She took him down the hall. The door to 4 South 7 was open, and Theodore Banks stopped in the doorway and saw, in the gray morning light, his oldest friend propped up in the bed, thin and hollowed and unmistakably alive, and beside the bed, in an old oak chair that did not match anything else in the room, a woman in rumpled scrubs holding a paperback she was not reading, just sitting, the way you sit with someone you have come to know in the dark. "Garrett," Theodore said, and his voice cracked on the single word. Garrett turned his head. It cost him something to do it. He looked at the man in the doorway for a long moment, finding the name, finding the years. "Theo," he said, rough and slow. Then he lifted one hand, the weak one, and laid it on the woman's arm, and said in the broken voice of a man still learning the way back to language, "She stayed the whole time. She's the one." He stopped, hunting for it. "She's the voice." Theodore looked at the nurse. He did not know her. He had never seen her in his life. He looked at the chair she sat in, old and dark and out of place, and something in him that had been holding for 8 months began to give way. "I don't understand," Imani said, because she did not. "I'm sorry, who is he? They never told me. The chart just had letters." And Theodore Banks, who had spent 20 years beside the man who built machines to watch over everyone, told her. He told her the name on the side of the building she could see from her bus. He told her about Marrow Health, about the 100,000 beds, about the sensors and the alerts and the screen glowing right there over Garrett's head. The screen Garrett himself had dreamed up so that no one would ever slip through unwatched. He told her how much the man in the bed was worth, a number so large it stopped meaning anything halfway through. And then he stopped, and he looked at the old chair, and he saw the whole shape of it at once. He built all of it, Theodore said quietly. Every sensor, every alert, a machine that watches 100,000 beds and never blinks. He spent his whole life making sure nobody would ever lie in a room like this unwatched. He shook his head slowly. He built everything. He built everything except a chair. He looked at Imani. You brought the chair. For a long moment no one in the room said anything. Then Theodore Banks put his face in his hands, and for the first time in more years than he could count, in front of a stranger, in a room he had been too afraid to enter, he cried for his friend who had nearly died alone under the best watching money could buy. He cried for the boy, the one they never spoke of, the one Garrett had monitored to the very end and could not save. He cried because the thing that had brought his friend back was not a sensor or an alert or anything in the $400 million or the 100,000 beds. It was a tired woman on her break in an old chair, doing the one thing the machine could not do. The one thing Garrett's whole life had been built to make unnecessary and had only proved you could never do without. Garrett watched him, too weak to cry, and from the bed he said the thing that broke his own creed in half. He had built a company on the promise that if you could monitor it, you could save it, and the rest was just sitting around. He looked at the woman in the chair, the rest, the sitting around, the thing he had spent his life dismissing, and he understood at last that it had been the whole thing the entire time. You can't monitor sitting, he said. His voice was barely there. All those years, I never built the one thing that mattered. You can't. There's no machine for it. There's just somebody. There's just somebody who stays. When Garrett Cole was strong enough to talk like himself again, he sent for Imani Foster. She almost did not go. She knew what these things were, the meetings where a rich man decides to be generous, and she had spent her whole life refusing to be anyone's good deed. She knew the shape of charity and she had a horror of it. Her mother had taken nothing from anyone that she had not worked for, and her mother's daughter was the same. So when she went up to the bright private room on the floor they had moved him to, she went with her back straight and her answer ready, and the answer was no. Garrett was sitting up. He looked more like the magazine covers now, the lived-in face filling back out, though something in his eyes had changed in a way no recovery would undo. He thanked her. She told him he did not need to. He tried to give her money, a number, a transfer, the kind of sum that would have erased every loan and bought the timing belt and a great deal more, and she stopped him before he finished the sentence. I don't take what I haven't earned, Imani said. I sat with you because you were by yourself. You don't pay somebody for that. The minute you pay for it, it turns into something else. It stops being the thing it was. Garrett looked at her for a long time. Then he did something that surprised them both. He laughed, a short, rough sound, the first laugh in 8 months and a few weeks. My mother would have said the exact same thing, he said, word for word. She used to clean those offices and never once took a dime she didn't work for. He was quiet a moment. So I'm not going to offer you a handout, I'm offering you a foundation. She did not understand, and he explained. He had been thinking, in the slow days of coming back, about the chair, about the fact that his company watched 100,000 beds, and not one of those screens could tell you whether the person in the bed was alone, about the night nurse who had done for him what no machine he ever built could do. And he had decided, with the clarity that sometimes comes to a man who has been to the gray country and back, that he was going to build the chair. He was going to build a program inside Marrow Health, funded out of his own pocket so no board could kill it, that would put paid people, trained and respected and decently waged, at the bedsides of patients who had no one. Not volunteers grabbing 20 minutes on a break and burning themselves out, people whose actual job on the actual payroll would be to sit, to read, to talk, to stay. The thing the machine could not measure, finally given a name and a budget and a chair of its own. I want you to run it, Garrett said. Not because you're charity, because you're the only person in this building who already knows how to do the thing it does. And Imani, who had come with no in her mouth, found herself hesitating, because this was not charity, this was work, this was the work she already did given a name and a wage and a future. But she shook her head. I can't run a foundation, she said. I'm a floor nurse 3 semesters short of a degree I'll never finish. I don't have the letters after my name. Nobody's going to listen to a night float RN telling a hospital how to spend money. Then finish the degree, Garrett said. 18 months, he said. You go back. You finish the master's you stopped. Marrow Health pays for it, every dollar, and not as a gift, as an investment in the person who's going to build this thing right. You keep your hours flexible so you're not breaking yourself or your boy. And when you walk out with those letters after your name, You don't run a foundation as a favor. You run it because you earned it, and because there is no one alive more qualified to do it. He held out his hand, the one that had reached for hers in the dark. I'm not offering you something you didn't earn, Imani. I'm offering you 18 months to go get what's already yours. She thought about it. She thought about her mother, who had taken nothing she had not worked for, and she understood that this was not the thing her mother had refused. Her mother had refused pity. This was not pity. This was a door, and behind the door was the degree she had grieved for 6 years, and on the other side of the degree was a life where the thing she was best at in all the world, the sitting, the staying, the thing that ran in her blood from a woman who had done it for 30 years and was buried now under a church that overflowed, would no longer be the thing she did for free on her breaks. It would be the work. It would be the whole work. She took his hand. 18 months, she said. What they built outlasted both of them, which is the only real measure of a thing worth building. It started small, the way the company itself had started, the way most true things start. Marrow Health called it the Presence Program at first, which was a name a committee had voted on, and Imani changed it the day she took over. 18 months later, with the letters finally after her name. She called it the Hattie Chair, after a nurse no one in the building remembered anymore, a woman named Hattie who had carved 3 words into the bottom of an old oak chair so that nobody would haul it away. Sit a while. Imani had the chair appraised and restored and bolted to nothing, kept exactly as it was, and she put it in the lobby of the first hospital that signed on, under a small plaque that told Miss Hattie's story and ended with her 3 carved words so that everyone who walked in would know what the program was for before anyone explained it. The work was simple to describe and hard to do. Trained companions paid a real wage, placed at the bedsides of patients who had no one. They sat, they read, they talked. They held the hands no one else was holding, and because Marrow Health was a company that lived and died by measurement, by numbers on a screen, Imani made them measure it, and what they found was the thing Garrett had spent his life refusing to believe. The patients with someone came back faster. Not all of them, not always. The science stayed careful and made no promises. But across the beds and the months in the hospitals, the pattern held, the same pattern Imani had seen in one room at night for 8 months. Company was not nothing. A voice in the dark did quiet work no monitor could measure, except now, at last, somebody was measuring it, and the number had a name, and the name was on the same screen as the heart rate and the oxygen and the pressure. Marrow Health, the company that watched everything, finally watched the one thing it had always missed. Whether you were alone? There was a man 2 years in, on a ventilator unit in a hospital outside Birmingham, who had been there 4 months without a single visit. Estranged from his children over a thing none of them could remember the start of anymore, the way those things go. The companion the Hattie Chair sent was a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Dell, a deacon at his church for 40 years, who came every afternoon and read him the sports pages and argued with him about a baseball team the man could not respond to having opinions about. I know you in there, Mr. Dell would tell him, settling into the chair. And I know you got the wrong team, so we gon' fix that first. After 6 weeks the man wrote 3 words on a whiteboard, his hand shaking around the marker. Call my daughter. Mr. Dell called the daughter. She came. She had not known. Nobody had told her, because there had been no one to tell her, and the machines that watched her father's every breath had no field for the fact that he wanted, more than air, to see her face. She sat down in the chair. Mr. Dell gave up for her. She stayed. That was one man. There were thousands of that man, it turned out, scattered across the beds of the country, unwatched in the one way that counts, and the program found them one chair at a time. Imani kept a file of those stories, not for the company, for herself. She read them on the hard nights. She thought of them as her mother's other children, the people Constance Foster never got to sit with, finally getting somebody. Garrett funded it out of his own fortune for the rest of his life and left it endowed when he died, years later, and he did not die alone, because by then there was always somebody in the chair. He and Imani stayed in each other's lives the way people do who have shared a thing too large for words, not close exactly, but permanent. 2 people who had met in the gray country and walked out of it changed. Marcus grew up. He remembered, dimly, a stretch of his childhood when his mother was always tired and always studying, and then a stretch when she was less tired and stood up straighter. And he remembered the night, when he was 7, that she had tried to explain to him where she went at night, that there was a man at her work who was sleeping for a very long time and could not wake up. Does he have somebody to sit with him? Marcus had asked because he was 7, and 7-year-olds go straight to the center of a thing without all the walking around it that grown people do. He does now, Imani had said. Then he's okay, Marcus had said, and gone back to his coloring, satisfied, having named in 9 words the entire thing his mother had spent 6 years and would spend the rest of her life trying to live out. He's okay because somebody sits with him. That was all of it. The boy had said all of it. The chair is still in the lobby. People sit in it sometimes without knowing the story, just resting, just waiting. And that is allowed, that is the point. And the woman who started it, who runs it now across more hospitals than she ever imagined, still takes one shift a week at a bedside herself, because she says you cannot run the thing if you forget how to do the thing. And on those nights, in the dark hour, she pulls a chair close to the bed of someone with no one, and she puts her hand over theirs and she tells them they are not by themselves. And sometimes, when the words run out, she hums an old hymn low in the dark the way her mother used to. And somewhere behind it, steady the way it has been there her whole life, she hears her mother's voice in a kitchen a long time ago, saying the thing she said about everything. Sitting is the first kind of love. It is the one before all the others. You learn to sit with somebody, baby, and you will never run out of ways to help. This story is a work of fiction. The characters, the company, the hospital, and the events are invented, and any resemblance to real people or institutions is coincidental.